So you guys donated 3 pairs of fake Yeezys so that we could cut them apart, run the tests on them, and really compare them to the authentic pair of Yeezy 350s to really see what you get when you buy a pair of fake sneakers. And this is the first episode of the sneaker version of Moctober, where Moctober is where we cut apart MOCTOE boots all the way through October. But since we've started doing more and more sneakers, we wanted to do a sneaker Moctober. And so this version of Moctober is MOCK-tober because they're mock versions of the real sneakers. A little play on words to keep it nice and uniform across the board for Moctober. So these are the mock versions of your favorite sneakers. And let me know what you like about this video, what you don't like, what you'd like us to test, and what, because this is kind of like a new style of video where we're really comparing them in an in-depth way, and where I'm not as in-deep in the sneakerhead culture as much. I think it's a strength of ours because we are able to look at things a little bit more objectively, but also it lends us to having a few blind spots. So let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you like us to add and test and look at when we do these fake sneaker videos. And thanks to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video, and they would like me to tell you about the easiest and most fun way to spice up your football season, and that's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just look for your favorite or least favorite players' stats, pick whether you think they'll end up with a higher or lower total than the number of the week's game, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. And Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy to use website and, more importantly, their mobile app. And since Underdog is a daily fantasy app, they are able to operate in a lot more states such as Florida, California, Texas, and much more. And the way the pick'em works is you pick between 2 and 5 players for your pick'em entry, and then if you get all those picks right, you'll take home some cold, hard cash. And it's not just NFL either. You can pick from NFL, NBA, PGA, MLB, NLH, ESPN Sports, NASCAR, F1, and more. I like boxing and UFC, and you can also do that. And that's, you know, I'm not much of a football guy, but I do. Here's the thing about this type of thing. If you get to the point where you've watched so many games where you want to spice it up, and that makes the game so much more interesting and so much more fun, especially if you start doing it with friends, because all of a sudden there's real stakes on the line rather than just watching something. Just head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and sign up with the promo code RoseAnvil, and also Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 if you use my code. And thanks again to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video. Okay, now let's go over the contender. So first, the real deal is the authentic pair of Yeezy 350s. It came out in 2016. They retailed for $240, and this is going to be the benchmark that we're comparing the fakes against, obviously. And then for the first fake, we've got the exact same thing, but a fake version. These were purchased for $200. They're made in China, and they're allegedly a higher quality fake pair. Next is the blue tints. They were purchased for $40, and they were purchased in China and brought back to the US. And then the final contender is the whites. These were $12, so the cheapest option. So we've got a few different options in there, a few different things we're looking at for different price range to really see, you know, does spending more on fakes mean you get a better quality fake, or is it all just the same? So the first thing that we wanted to look at was how these uppers reacted to flame. Because if you look at the uppers, they're very similar. It's actually pretty surprising, coming from a little bit of ignorance, how close they can match every single aspect of this, at least from 4 feet away. You know, some of the really in-depth sneakerheads are going to notice differences right off the bat. But for the general public that's not really into the fine details, they're pretty solid fakes. But we wanted to test what materials they were making the uppers out of. So we put the flame to the authentic pair first, and as you can see, it burned and kind of melted. And then we did the fake belugas, and it reacted in the exact same way. Next to the baby blues, reacted the exact same way, and finally the whites was also the exact same way. So all of them are very synthetic uppers. So it seems like the uppers are all made out of a similar material. It's not cotton, it's not anything that's severely different than the originals, except for, you know, something that we don't know for sure, but it looks like these fakes, the colors fade a lot more. Obviously they're more worn than the authentic pair that we're comparing them against, but it just seems like the colors are a lot duller, or they've faded. Next, to check the weave on these, we did that same vertical and horizontal cut test to try to see if it would unravel. And on the authentic pair, the horizontal cut didn't really unravel very much, but the vertical cut unraveled really easily. Then if we look at the fake belugas, basically the same thing where the horizontal didn't unravel, but the vertical did. And same with the blue tints, and exactly the same with the white pair. So from that tells me that they're weaved in the exact same way and the same pattern as the authentic pairs. Next, we wanted to test the responsiveness, and try to get some data on the comfortability and how the foam reacts, because a lot of these tests aren't the most scientific, but they're the best that we've got to try to put some data on these sneakers. So we did the ball drop test first. We did it across the board. We did 10 drops each, and honestly, they all performed about the same. The authentic pair did bounce back up 18 inches. The Belugas was 21.7. The blue tints were 15.8, and the whites were 22. So there is a difference between them, but because of how rudimentary the test is, I still would consider that within the same ballpark of responsiveness, because what I was really looking for as a quality indicator was if that ball just died on top of the shoe, then that would tell us that it's a different type of responsiveness underneath your foot. And one of the issues with that test is that that ball bearing is not very heavy, so we wanted to run the bar drop test as well to maybe put some more real world weight on the outsole. So we dropped the bar on the Authentics first, and it was 9.2 inches. The fake Belugas were 8.9, the blue tints were 9.3, and the whites were 9.2. So even more similar across the board with the bar drop test. And so to try to figure out why that is so similar, we wanted to test the hardness of the rubber on each of these shoes. So the authentic pair was 59 to 60, the Belugas were a little bit harder, the fake Belugas were a little bit harder at 60 to 66, and then the rest of the fakes were right around that same range. So the fakes were just a little bit harder than the authentic pair. So not enough to really draw some solid conclusions on the difference between the outsoles, at least for the hardness of them. But there seems to be a difference in maybe the ingredients or the compounds used in the rubber, because the fakes are really yellowing and they're starting to get a little bit of a film on top. They're starting to look like they're aging faster than what you'd expect from a real high quality rubber compound. And we also wanted to measure the hardness of the foams, because the nice thing about these Yeezys, you got the little foam window right there that we can just put our Duro tester on there. The authentic pair is right around 20 to 25. The fake Belugas are a little bit harder at like a 28, 29. The blues are even harder at 37, and the whites right in the middle at 25. So a little bit of a difference in densities and hardnesses of the foams. So far, these fakes are not only similar looking, but they're really similar in how they perform and the ingredients and the components that they're made out of. But if we pull out the insoles and check these out, so the authentic pair, it's a really light, thin insole, and then we pull out the Belugas, almost identical. The baby blues, if I can get it out, a little bit thinner, a little bit cheaper. This is definitely a lot farther away than the fake Belugas. And then the whites are a little bit closer to the Beluga. So really the only bad ones are the baby blues. But if we look underneath of there, you can see that they're all strobo stitched. They all have that lasting board in the same pattern, and it feels like similar materials. And really the only one that's significantly different are the baby blues. It's more of a foam lasting material rather than this like felted material. And then to the final thing, maybe the biggest difference that we noticed before we cut these in half is the gluing and the construction of all these. Because if you look at all these little internal components and all the different reinforcement on the authentic pair, they're very well cemented. They're nearly impossible to get off. Versus every single one of the fake pairs, you've just got panels peeling off, falling apart, like the reinforced strip that's on that big seam that goes down the middle is just barely hanging on. It looks like it's glued on with a glue stick. Inside the linings are kind of falling apart, and just the general gluing and precision to put these shoes together is way off on the fakes compared to the authentic pair. So that's one of those intangible aspects that's really hard to notice when you're buying a pair of fakes. Like you can't sit there and pull on the different materials and see how well it's cemented, but there's a stark difference between how these are constructed and glued together compared to the authentics. But a lot of times the real quality indicators are on the inside of whatever boot or shoe we're cutting in half. So let's cut these in half and see if there's any surprises on the inside. All right, we got them all chopped in half, so let's start with the real authentic pair first, then we'll go down the line. So let's see what's inside. So surprisingly similar on the inside. They even have that Ultra Boost honeycombing like bead effect on the inside, except for the baby blues. These are, I think I call them baby blues this entire time. They're called blue tints, but I guess now they're baby blues. But you can see on the inside here that it's just a solid piece of foam. You don't see that little honeycombing look, that you don't have that little extra shell around the Ultra Boost foam that gives you a little bit more of that responsiveness, allegedly. But the other two, they're surprisingly accurate. It's very similar foam to the Ultra Boost. It cuts a little bit differently. It seems like it cuts more jaggedly, so there must be a little bit of a difference in the compound, but the amount of foam also differs. And same thing with the toe. The real authentic pair has just a little bit more foam. And now that we've got it cut in half, this will give us a more accurate reading on the hardness of the foam with the durometer tester, because a lot of times foam has a little bit of a hard shell around it, and so you don't really know how squishy it is till you get to the inside of the foam. So if we put the durometer tester on here, it seems like the fake pairs are just a little bit harder than the authentic pair, but not by much. It's kind of the same story we've seen so far with the foam across the board. And to get a general idea of how similar these foams are, we wanted to burn the foam. But as you can see, the authentic pairs, it gets that really caramelized color, it gets really gooey and sticky, and then kind of hardens when it dries. Well, if you look at the fake belugas, it's very, very similar. It gets that same like caramel crust on it and hardens up. And if we look at the, not baby blue, what are they called? And then if we look at the blue tints that are a different type of foam, it reacted differently as well. You can see it got really crumbly and just didn't caramelize and turn to that sheen after it dried, or after it, I guess not dried, after it cooled down. So it's a different foam compound. And the whites performed in a similar way to the authentic pair, where it kind of caramelized and turned goopy and then had a sheen when it was cooled down. So once again, very similar except for the blue tints. And then if you look at the different thicknesses of the outsoles, very similar thickness, very similar construction, everything looks very similar. So overall, looking at the materials and testing them and running them through a little garage science, they're very, very similar except for the blue tints. The blue tints are kind of off on their own thing. And to the untrained eye, if you don't know anything about Yeezys, but you know what a Yeezy is, you're probably like, oh yeah, that guy's wearing a pair of Yeezys. They're surprisingly close to the authentic pair, which I've never really bought a fake pair of sneakers before, and I just assume they're way off, but they're surprisingly similar. And so is there any real difference between an authentic pair and a fake pair? Yes, there's one huge difference that might outweigh any other potential difference that these shoes might have, and that's the quality of construction. Because look at all these fakes and see how all this material is just falling off. It's just not glued in the same way. You know, all these things are just lightly glued on. They're not like cemented on, versus the authentic pair. You cannot pry this material off. It is glued into the actual fabric itself, not just on top of the fabric. And just generally, all the fakes are falling apart. At any place that could be a fail spot, one of these shoes is failing. And just generally, the materials don't seem like they're made to the same standard because of how much the color's fading, how much it's yellowing, and just generally, there just seems like they're a little bit cheaper alternatives to what's on the inside of the Yeezys. And then the whole ethics behind fakes and the authentic pair is a completely different argument that we'll probably cover in the next mock sneaker video, because that's a whole other discussion. So finally, are fake Yeezys worth considering? I would only trust a pair if you plan on wearing them a handful of times, because if you really want an expensive, authentic looking pair, you're gonna spend about as much as the retail price of a real pair of Yeezys. So if you can get a pair of Yeezys for an authentic pair for the retail price, it seems like they're significantly better than even the most expensive fakes that we had here. And some people say that you can get just as good of a pair for half the price or a quarter of the price of an authentic pair. But at the end of the day, you're just rolling the dice. It's a huge gamble on what type of quality of fake you're gonna get. And because of the fact that they're fakes and they're coming from sketchy websites and you don't know exactly what you're dealing with, by the time you figure out some of the flaws in these, there's no way you're gonna get a refund. And there's really no refunds as far as I understand in the fake world anyway, because they're a fake, they're a counterfeit version of a real product. So with all that being said, comparing these 4 sneakers, I would say the Authentics are significantly better in every way and it's not worth buying the fake pair unless you're just gonna wear them a handful of times. So let me know what you guys think. What did you think of the tests and how this was structured? Give me some feedback on what you wanna see, what you didn't necessarily need to see, so we can make these videos as useful and informative, and more importantly, help you make smart buying decisions so you don't waste your money on a few pairs of fakes when you could have just used that money to buy an authentic pair if there is a huge difference. So thank you guys. See ya.